Some silences speak louder than any words ever could, and that Sunday evening my silence would echo through my family's life in ways they never imagined possible. My name is Harold Whitman, and at 72 years old I thought I understood the rhythms of family life. I'd raised 3 children, built a successful accounting practice from nothing, and weathered more storms than most men my age could count. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared me for that particular Sunday dinner in October. The evening started like so many others. Margaret, my daughter-in-law of 15 years, had invited me over for what she called family time. It was a tradition we'd maintained ever since my wife Alina passed 3 years ago. Every other Sunday I'd drive the 12 miles from my modest ranch house to their sprawling suburban home, bringing dessert and whatever vegetables I'd managed to coax from my garden. That evening I'd brought an apple crumble that had been Alina's specialty. I'd finally mastered her recipe after months of practice, and a basket of late-season tomatoes that had turned out particularly well. The October air was crisp, and I remember feeling genuinely grateful for this connection to my son Thomas's family. Thomas met me at the door with his usual warm smile. At 45, he'd grown into a successful man, working as a regional manager for a tech company. His 2 children, 16-year-old Olivia and 12-year-old Benjamin, were polite but distant in that way teenagers often are with grandparents. I understood. At their age, Sunday dinners with Grandpa Harold probably ranked somewhere below watching paint dry on their list of exciting activities. "Dad, glad you could make it," Thomas said, taking the crumble from my hands. "Margaret's been cooking all afternoon. She's really outdone herself this time." I followed him into the kitchen, where Margaret stood at the stove, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She was an attractive woman in her early 40s, always impeccably dressed even for casual family dinners. That evening she wore a crisp white blouse and dark slacks that somehow managed to look both casual and expensive. "Hello, Harold," she said without turning around. Her voice carried that particular tone I'd grown accustomed to over the years, polite but cool, like she was greeting a neighbor she didn't particularly care for. "Margaret," I replied, setting the tomato basket on the counter. "Thank you for having me. Something smells wonderful." She glanced at the tomatoes with what I can only describe as mild irritation. "Oh, more vegetables. I suppose I'll have to find somewhere to put these." It was a small slight, the kind of comment that might seem innocent to an outside observer, but I'd learned to read the subtle signals in Margaret's behavior. The tomatoes I'd carefully selected and lovingly grown weren't a thoughtful contribution to the meal, they were an inconvenience. Still, I kept my expression neutral. "Only if you can use them, otherwise please don't feel obligated." The dining room was set with Margaret's good china, the pattern she'd received as a wedding gift and only brought out for special occasions. I wondered what made this particular Sunday special, but I didn't ask. I'd learned that questions sometimes led to conversations I wasn't prepared for. Olivia appeared as we sat down, earbuds in, scrolling through her phone with the practiced indifference of a teenager who'd been dragged away from more important pursuits. Benjamin followed, his hair still damp from what I assumed was a hastily taken shower. "Olivia, phone away during dinner," Thomas said with the weary tone of a parent who'd fought this battle many times before. She sighed dramatically but complied, shooting me a look that suggested this inconvenience was somehow my fault. The conversation started pleasantly enough. Thomas talked about a promotion he was hoping to receive. Benjamin shared news about making the middle school basketball team, and Olivia grudgingly admitted that her AP history class was not completely terrible. I listened, asked appropriate questions, and shared what I hoped were encouraging comments. This was my role in these dinners, the supportive grandfather, the interested listener, the family patriarch who was grateful to be included. About halfway through the main course, Margaret began discussing their upcoming Christmas vacation plans. They were considering a ski trip to Colorado, something that would be both expensive and elaborate. "It would be so nice to have a real family vacation," Margaret said, cutting her chicken with precise, almost aggressive strokes. "Just the 4 of us, no complications." I nodded politely, though something in her tone made me pay closer attention. "That sounds wonderful. Colorado is beautiful this time of year." "Yes, well, we're thinking of making it a tradition, an annual family trip, just." She paused, looking directly at me, "Just the immediate family." The message was clear, though delivered with Margaret's typical passive-aggressive subtlety. I wasn't part of their immediate family. I was a complication to be managed, not a member to be included. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "We haven't made any final decisions yet," he said quickly. "Oh, but we have," Margaret replied smoothly. "Remember our discussion last night about how important it is for the kids to have dedicated family time?" I took a sip of water and chose my words carefully. "Family time is important. I'm sure you'll have a wonderful trip." The conversation moved on, but something had shifted. Margaret's comments became more pointed, her tone more openly dismissive. When I mentioned helping Benjamin with his math homework the previous week, she waved it off. "Oh, that's sweet, Harold, but Benjamin's doing fine with his tutor. We prefer professional help with academics." When I offered to pick up Olivia from soccer practice sometime to give Margaret a break, she practically laughed. That's kind, but I have a very organized system. I don't want to disrupt our routine. Each comment was a small cut, delivered with a smile and couched in language that made it difficult to object without seeming unreasonable. But the cumulative effect was clear. I was being systematically excluded from my grandchildren's lives. Thomas tried to change the subject several times, but Margaret seemed determined to make her point. Finally, as I was complimenting her on the meal and thanking her for her efforts, she put down her fork and looked at me directly. "Harold, can I be honest with you?" The question hung in the air like a storm cloud. Thomas's face went pale and both children looked up from their plates with sudden interest. "Of course," I replied, though every instinct told me I didn't want to hear what was coming. Margaret smiled, but it was the kind of smile you might give someone you were about to fire. "I think it's time we address something that's been bothering me for a while." She paused, as if gathering her thoughts, though I suspected she'd rehearsed this moment many times. "You come here every other Sunday, and we welcome you. We feed you, we include you in our conversations, we let you spend time with our children. But honestly, Harold, it feels like we're carrying you." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. Years of dealing with difficult clients had taught me to maintain composure even when under attack. "I see," I said quietly. "You," Margaret continued, her voice gaining confidence, "because I don't think you do. You don't contribute financially to these dinners. You don't help with the preparation or the cleanup. You show up with your little garden vegetables and your homemade desserts, and we're supposed to be grateful." Thomas finally found his voice. "Margaret, that's no." "Thomas, let me finish. Your father is a grown man. He can handle an honest conversation." She turned back to me, her eyes bright with what I could only interpret as satisfaction. "The truth is, Harold, you become a freeloader. You take our time, our energy, our food, and you give nothing back. At your age, shouldn't you be contributing something meaningful to this family instead of just existing on the periphery?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in the living room ticking, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a neighbor's dog barking. But in that dining room, nobody moved or spoke. I looked around the table at my family. Thomas stared at his plate, his jaw clenched in what I assumed was embarrassment or anger. Olivia and Benjamin watched me with the fascinated horror of children witnessing a car accident. And Margaret sat back in her chair with the satisfied expression of someone who'd finally said what she'd been thinking for years. I could have defended myself. I could have pointed out that I'd never asked for their hospitality, that I'd always brought what I could, that I'd spent countless hours babysitting their children when they were younger. I could have mentioned the college funds I'd quietly established for both grandchildren, or the down payment I'd helped with when they bought their house, or the countless small ways I'd tried to support their family over the years. Instead, I took a slow sip of water, set down my napkin, and stood up. "Thank you for dinner, Margaret. It was delicious." My voice was calm, steady, completely devoid of the anger or hurt that was churning in my chest. I'd learned long ago that dignity was often the most powerful response to cruelty. "Harold, wait." Thomas started to stand, but I held up a gentle hand. "It's fine, son. Margaret has made her feelings clear, and I respect her honesty. I think it's best if I go." I walked to the entry hall, retrieved my jacket from the closet, and headed for the door. Behind me, I could hear the beginning of what sounded like it would be a significant argument between Thomas and Margaret, but I didn't stop to listen. As I drove home through the dark October evening, I felt strangely calm. The hurt was there, deep and sharp, but it was accompanied by something else, clarity. For the first time in years, I understood exactly where I stood with my son's family. My ranch house felt different when I walked through the front door that night. It wasn't the lonely place I'd sometimes imagined it to be when I was sitting around their dinner table. It was quiet, yes, but it was also peaceful. It was mine. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in Alina's favorite chair, looking out at the garden we'd planned together 40 years ago. The tomato plants were nearly finished for the season, but they'd given us a wonderful harvest. The apple tree we'd planted when Thomas was born was heavy with fruit. This little piece of land held decades of memories, years of careful cultivation and love. Over the next few days, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I took stock of my life. What I discovered might have surprised Margaret, had she bothered to ask. The freeloader she'd so eloquently described had assets that would have made her reconsider her harsh words. My accounting practice, which I'd sold 5 years earlier, had been more successful than I'd ever let on. Conservative investments, a paid-off mortgage, and Alina's life insurance had left me in a financial position that could only be described as comfortable. Very comfortable. More importantly, I had time. Lots of it. Time that I'd been spending every other Sunday sitting through increasingly uncomfortable family dinners, trying to maintain a connection that was clearly unwanted. I began to think about how I might use that time differently. The first thing I did was call my attorney, James Morrison. James had been handling my affairs for 20 years, and we developed the kind of friendship that comes from mutual respect and shared experiences. "Harold, good to hear from you," James said when I reached him on Monday morning. What can I do for you? I need to make some changes to my will, I said. There was a pause. Are you feeling all right? Is everything okay? I smiled, though he couldn't see it. I'm fine, James. Better than fine, actually. But I've had some clarity about my priorities, and I want to make sure my estate reflects those priorities. We scheduled a meeting for later that week. In the meantime, I began researching something I'd been thinking about for years, but had never acted upon. Alina and I had always talked about establishing a scholarship fund for students pursuing accounting degrees. She'd believed, as I did, that financial literacy was one of the most important gifts you could give a young person. We planned to set it up together, but her illness and death had derailed those plans. Now, sitting in my quiet house with all the time in the world, I realized there was nothing stopping me from honoring that dream. By Thursday, I had preliminary plans for the Alina Whitman Memorial Scholarship Fund. It would provide full tuition assistance for deserving students at the local state university, with preference given to first-generation college students from low-income families. The endowment would require a significant portion of my estate, but I found the prospect exciting rather than frightening. My money would go to young people who would appreciate the opportunity, who would use their education to build better lives for themselves and their families. When I met with James on Friday, I was more animated than I'd been in months. You seem different, he observed as we went through the documents. Energized. I feel different, I admitted. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm moving forward instead of just maintaining. The changes, too. My will were significant. The college funds I'd established for Olivia and Benjamin would remain untouched. My issues with Margaret didn't extend to punishing my grandchildren. But the bulk of my estate, which would have previously gone to Thomas and his family, was being redirected to the scholarship fund and several local charities. I also made arrangements for my house and property. Rather than leaving it to Thomas, who would likely sell it immediately, I was donating it to the city for use as a community garden and educational center. Alina would have loved the idea of children learning to grow their own food where we had spent so many happy hours. James reviewed the documents carefully. Harold, I have to ask, are you sure about this? These are major changes. If something were to happen between you and your family. Something has already happened, I said calmly. This isn't a reaction to a temporary disagreement. This is me finally accepting reality and acting accordingly. He nodded slowly. All right then, we'll have the paperwork ready for your signature next week. The following Sunday came and went without a phone call from Thomas or Margaret. I spent the afternoon tending to my garden and reading a book I'd been meaning to get to for months. It was surprisingly pleasant. Monday brought the first contact from my son's family since the dinner incident. Thomas called while I was having my morning coffee. Dad, we need to talk, he said without preamble. Good morning, Thomas. How are you? We're fine. Look, about Sunday night, Margaret feels terrible about what she said. She was having a bad day and she took it out on you, which wasn't fair. I sipped my coffee and watched a cardinal land on the bird feeder outside my kitchen window. I see. She wants to apologize. We all do. Why don't you come to dinner this Sunday? We can put this whole thing behind us. The offer hung in the air while I considered my response. Thomas sounded genuinely contrite, but I couldn't help wondering if Margaret had actually expressed remorse or if this was his attempt to smooth over family discord. That's kind of you to offer, I said finally. But I think Margaret was more honest than she realized. Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, but that doesn't make it less true. Dad, come on, you know she didn't mean it. She was just stressed about work and the kids' schedules and, Thomas, I interrupted gently, when someone tells you how they really feel about you, believe them. Your wife made it clear that my presence is a burden on your family. I'm not going to put any of you in that position anymore. There was a long pause. So what are you saying? I'm saying that I understand I'm not really welcome in your home and I'm okay with that. I'm not angry and I'm not trying to punish anyone. I'm just accepting the situation as it is. That's not, Dad, your family, of course you're welcome. I appreciate that, son, but we both know that's not true, and that's fine. I'm 72 years old and I've learned that trying to force relationships doesn't work. I'd rather spend my time and energy on connections that are genuinely wanted. Another pause, longer this time. What does that mean exactly? It means I'm going to step back and let you focus on your immediate family, as Margaret put it. You won't have to worry about accommodating me anymore. Dad, this is ridiculous. You're being dramatic. I almost smiled at that. In Margaret's version of events, I was probably being dramatic. In my version, I was finally being realistic. I don't think so, Thomas, but time will tell. We ended the conversation with an agreement that we'd talk soon, though I suspected we both knew that was unlikely. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a new routine. Without the obligation of family dinners every other Sunday, I found myself with more free time than I'd had in years. I used it well. I volunteered at the local literacy center, helping adults learn to read and manage their finances. My decades of experience as an accountant made me valuable in ways that had nothing to do with family obligation and everything to do with genuine contribution. I joined a hiking group for seniors and rediscovered my love of being outdoors. Every Tuesday and Thursday, a group of us would explore different trails around the county. The conversations were engaging, the company was welcoming, and nobody made me feel like a burden. I started attending evening lectures at the community college, something Alina and I had always talked about doing. Philosophy, history, astronomy, I was like a kid in a candy store, learning for the pure joy of learning. Most importantly, I began working seriously on the scholarship fund. By Thanksgiving, the paperwork was complete, and the Alina Whitman Memorial Scholarship Fund was officially established. The first scholarships would be awarded the following fall. Thanksgiving came and went without an invitation from Thomas and Margaret. I spent the day volunteering at a community dinner for families in need, serving turkey and stuffing to people who genuinely appreciated the effort. It was one of the most meaningful Thanksgivings I'd had in years. Christmas was approaching when I received an unexpected phone call from Olivia. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was surprised to hear her voice. "Grandpa Harold," she said, sounding younger than her 16 years. "Hello, sweetheart. This is a nice surprise. How are you?" "I'm okay, I guess. Can I ask you something?" Of course. There was a pause, and I could hear her taking a deep breath. "Why don't you come to dinner anymore?" The question was simple, but I could hear the complexity behind it. How do you explain adult relationship dynamics to a teenager without making her feel caught in the middle? Well, your mother felt that my visits were more of a burden than a pleasure for your family. I decided to respect her feelings and give everyone some space. "But I miss you," she said quietly. "And Benjamin does too, even though he won't say it." My heart clenched. This was the part of the situation that truly hurt, the collateral damage to my relationship with my grandchildren. "I miss you both too, sweetheart, very much. Mom says you're being stubborn and dramatic. Dad says you're hurt and need time, but nobody will tell us what actually happened." I closed my eyes, trying to find the right words. Sometimes adults have disagreements about how relationships should work. Your parents and I have different ideas about my role in your family, and we couldn't find a way to compromise. "That's stupid," she said with typical teenage bluntness. I couldn't help but smile. Many things adults do seem stupid when you're 16, but the important thing for you to know is that this has nothing to do with you or Benjamin. My feelings about you haven't changed at all. Then why can't we just see you separately? Like I could come visit you, or you could pick me up from school sometimes. It was a logical suggestion, but I knew it would never be allowed. Margaret had made it clear that she wanted me out of their lives, and I doubted she'd approve of private visits between me and the children. "That would be wonderful, Olivia, but it would need to be okay with your parents first. These kinds of arrangements need everyone's agreement to work." It was quiet for a moment. "This is all Mom's fault, isn't it?" I sighed. "Sweetheart, it's nobody's fault. It's just a situation that didn't have a good solution. Sometimes that happens in families. Will you ever come back?" The question broke my heart, but I owed her honesty. "I don't know. I hope someday we can find a way to spend time together that works for everyone. But right now, I think it's best if I stay away from the Sunday dinners." We talked for a few more minutes about her school, her friends, and her plans for Christmas break. When we hung up, I sat in my chair for a long time, staring out at the winter garden and thinking about the unintended consequences of adult conflicts. That conversation with Olivia clarified something important for me. While I was content with my decision to step back from Thomas and Margaret's household, I didn't want to lose my grandchildren entirely. But I also knew that any attempt to maintain those relationships independently would likely create more conflict. The solution came to me a few days later when I was working on the scholarship fund paperwork. I decided to write letters to both Olivia and Benjamin, not to be delivered now, but to be held until they were adults and could make their own decisions about whether they wanted a relationship with their grandfather. In those letters, I explained the situation as honestly as I could without demonizing their parents. I told them about their grandmother Alina, about the family history they might not know, and about how proud I was of the young people they were becoming. I included photos, family stories, and contact information they could use if they ever wanted to reach out. I gave the sealed letters to James with instructions that they be delivered when Olivia and Benjamin turned 21. Winter passed quietly. I stayed busy with my volunteer work, my hiking group, and my continuing education. I was healthier and happier than I'd been in years. The absence of family drama had freed up emotional energy I didn't realize I'd been spending. Spring brought an unexpected development. Thomas called one evening in late April, his voice subdued and formal. "Dad, I need to tell you something." "I'm listening." "Margaret and I are getting divorced." The news wasn't entirely surprising. The tension I'd witnessed at that final Sunday dinner had clearly been about more than just my presence in their lives. "I'm sorry to hear that, son. Divorce is never easy, especially with children involved." "Yeah, it's been difficult. We've been in counseling for months, but we just can't make it work. She's moving back to her parents' place in California. The kids will stay with me." This changed everything. With Margaret out of the picture, the primary source of conflict between Thomas and me was gone, but I was cautious about assuming anything. "How are Olivia and Benjamin handling it?" "As well as can be expected. It's been hard on them, but they're resilient. Actually, that's part of why I called. They've been asking about you a lot lately." I waited, unsure where this conversation was headed. I know I messed up, Thomas continued. I should have stood up for you that night at dinner. I should have told Margaret she was out of line. I was a coward, and I'm sorry. The apology was unexpected, and I realized important to me. I appreciate that, Thomas. I was wondering. Would you consider having dinner with us sometime? Just the three of us. I think the kids would really like that. I looked out at my garden where the spring vegetables were just beginning to show their first green shoots. It had been 6 months since that awful Sunday dinner, 6 months of quiet and peace and self-discovery. I'd learned that I didn't need family acceptance to be happy, but I also realized I didn't need to reject it if it was genuinely offered. I'd like that, I said finally. But let's start small. Maybe I could take the kids out for ice cream or something casual first. They'd love that. Actually, Benjamin has been working on a science project about plants. He keeps saying he wishes he could ask Grandpa Harold about gardening. I smiled. Well, he's welcome to come over anytime. I'd be happy to show him around the garden. That weekend, Benjamin came for his first solo visit to my house in years. He was fascinated by everything: the composting system, the crop rotation schedule, the natural pest management techniques Alina and I had developed over the years. This is so cool, Grandpa, he said as I showed him how to tell when tomatoes were ready to harvest. Can I help you plant stuff? Of course. In fact, I was thinking of putting in a special section just for you if you're interested. You could choose what to grow and take care of it yourself. His face lit up. Really? Can I grow pumpkins? I want to grow a giant pumpkin for Halloween. Pumpkins it is. We'll need to start planning now if we want them ready by October. As we worked in the garden that afternoon, Benjamin chattered about school, his friends, his parents' divorce, and his dreams for the future. He was curious, thoughtful, and surprisingly mature for a 12-year-old. Olivia came by the following week, initially reluctant but gradually warming up to the peaceful atmosphere of the house. She helped me organize Alina's old recipe collection and listened with genuine interest as I told her stories about her grandmother. I wish I remembered her better, she said as we looked through photo albums. I was so little when she died. She loved you very much, I told her. She used to say you had her eyes and her stubborn streak. Olivia laughed. Mom always says I'm stubborn. Your grandmother turned her stubborn streak into determination, and it served her well. I suspect you'll do the same. These individual visits with the grandchildren became a regular part of my routine. Benjamin came every Saturday to work in the garden, and Olivia visited most Sundays to help with various projects around the house. Thomas occasionally joined us, and slowly, carefully, we began rebuilding our relationship. The difference between these new family connections and the old Sunday dinner routine was remarkable. Without Margaret's passive-aggressive comments and forced interactions, we could actually enjoy each other's company. The conversations were real, the laughter was genuine, and nobody felt obligated to perform family harmony that didn't exist. One evening in late summer, as Benjamin and I were harvesting vegetables for dinner, he looked up at me with dirt-smudged cheeks and a serious expression. Grandpa, can I ask you something? Always. Why didn't you fight back when Mom was mean to you at dinner that night? The question caught me off guard. I wondered how much the children had understood about that evening, but neither had mentioned it directly until now. I considered my answer carefully, because fighting wouldn't have solved anything, Benjamin. Your mother was upset about things that had nothing to do with me, and arguing would have just made everyone more upset. But wasn't it hard to just sit there? It was very hard, I admitted. But sometimes the most difficult thing to do is also the wisest thing to do. He thought about this while we picked cherry tomatoes. Dad says you were being the bigger person. What do you think that means? I think it means you chose to be kind even when someone wasn't being kind to you. I smiled, impressed by his insight. That's exactly right, and you know what I discovered? When you choose kindness over conflict, you usually end up happier in the long run. Is that why you seem different now? Happier, I mean. His observation surprised me. Do I seem happier? Yeah, you laugh more and you seem more, I don't know, relaxed, like you're not worried about saying the wrong thing. Out of the mouths of babes, Benjamin had accurately identified something I'd only recently come to understand myself. Without the stress of walking on eggshells around Margaret, without the constant low-level anxiety of family dinners where I felt unwelcome, I had indeed become more relaxed, more genuinely myself. You're very perceptive, Benjamin. You're right, I am happier now. Sometimes when you stop trying to force something that isn't working, you create space for better things to happen. That autumn, as we harvested Benjamin's pumpkin patch, which had produced several impressively large pumpkins, I reflected on the events of the past year. Margaret's cruel words that Sunday evening had been intended to hurt and diminish me. Instead, they had freed me from the obligation to maintain relationships that weren't truly wanted, freed me from the stress of trying to please people who couldn't be pleased, freed me to discover new sources of meaning and connection in my life. The scholarship fund had awarded its first grants that fall. 3 deserving students were now attending college with full tuition support, and I'd been invited to meet them at a small reception. Their gratitude and excitement about their educational opportunities was far more rewarding than any family dinner had ever been. My volunteer work had expanded to include financial counseling for families in crisis. My hiking group had become a close-knit community of friends who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. I'd taken up watercolor painting and discovered I had a talent for capturing the subtle beauty of seasonal changes in the garden. Most importantly, my relationships with Olivia and Benjamin had deepened in ways that wouldn't have been possible under the old arrangement. Without the artificial structure of obligatory family dinners, we discovered genuine affection and mutual respect. Olivia, now 17 and looking at colleges, often sought my advice about her future. She was considering studying environmental science, inspired partly by our conversations about sustainable gardening and partly by her own growing awareness of climate issues. "Grandpa, do you think I'm crazy for wanting to major in something that might not make a lot of money?" she asked one Sunday as we walked through the garden. "I think you'd be crazy to major in something you don't care about just because it might be profitable," I replied. "Your grandmother always said that if you love what you do, you'll find a way to make it work financially, but if you hate what you do, no amount of money will make you happy. Mom always said I should be practical above everything else." I nodded. "Practicality is important, but so is passion. The best careers combine both." She was quiet for a moment, picking late-season flowers for a bouquet. "I've been thinking about what you said once, about how you chose accounting because you wanted to help people understand money better. That seems like a good combination of practical and meaningful." It was for me. "But your path doesn't have to look like mine. The important thing is that it's authentically yours." These conversations with Olivia reminded me of talks I'd had with Thomas when he was her age, full of dreams and uncertainty about the future. The difference was that now I could offer guidance without feeling like every word was being judged or filtered through someone else's agenda. Benjamin, meanwhile, had developed into quite the gardener. His pumpkin patch had been such a success that he'd asked to expand his plot the following year. More importantly, he'd begun to understand the deeper lessons that gardening teaches: patience, planning, the acceptance of things beyond your control. "Some of my tomatoes got blight," he reported during one of our Saturday sessions. "But the ones we planted in the raised bed with the better drainage are fine." "What do you think that teaches us?" I asked. "That preparation matters, and that you can't control everything, but you can control some things." "Exactly. Those are lessons that will serve you well in every part of your life." Thomas had grown more comfortable with these arrangements as well. He'd started joining us for dinner occasionally, and the conversations were easier than they'd been in years. Without Margaret's constant undercurrent of disapproval, he seemed more relaxed, more like the son I remembered. One evening in late October, exactly. Year after the infamous Sunday dinner, Thomas and I sat on my back porch watching the sunset. The children were inside, Olivia doing homework and Benjamin organizing seeds for next year's garden. "Dad, I need to tell you something," Thomas said, his voice serious. I braced myself, wondering what new complication was about to arise. "Margaret called last week. She wants to know if the kids can come visit her in California for Christmas." This was the first mention of Margaret in months. "What did you tell her?" I said I'd discuss it with them and let her know. But honestly, neither of them seems very interested in going. I wasn't surprised. Children have long memories for emotional wounds, and Margaret's treatment of me that night had been witnessed by both grandchildren. They'd also seen the positive changes in their father and grandfather once the source of tension was removed. "What do you think?" I asked. Thomas sighed. "Part of me thinks they should maintain a relationship with their mother, regardless of what happened between us. But another part of me remembers how toxic things had become, and I wonder if they're better off with some distance." "What do Olivia and Benjamin say?" "Olivia says she'll go if Benjamin wants to, but she'd rather stay here. Benjamin says he doesn't want to go at all. He's worried that if he leaves, his garden will die over the winter." I smiled at that. Benjamin's concern for his plants was touching, if misguided. You could tell him that gardens are meant to rest in winter. It's part of their natural cycle. I did. He said he knows that, but he still doesn't want to go. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. Finally, Thomas spoke again. "I've been thinking a lot about that night last year, about the things Margaret said to you. It's in the past, son." "No, it's not really. I let her say horrible things to my father, and I didn't defend you. I've been carrying that guilt for a year." I turned to look at him. In the porch light, he looked older than his 46 years, but also somehow more settled, more at peace with himself. "Thomas, we've talked about this. You're forgiven. We can't change what happened, but we can choose how we move forward." "I know, but I want you to understand something. The way things are now, with the kids coming here regularly, with us having real conversations, with you being genuinely part of our lives, this is what I always wanted. Margaret never understood that." "What do you mean?" He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Margaret saw family relationships as transactions. Everything had to be even, measured, accounted for. She couldn't understand that love isn't a balance sheet. She couldn't see that your presence in our lives was a gift, not a burden." His words touched something deep in my chest. "That means more to me than you know. The irony is that she was so worried about you being a freeloader that she couldn't see what you were actually contributing. Your wisdom, your patience with the kids, your stability. After she left, I realized how much we'd all been missing because she was so focused on keeping score." I thought about Margaret's accusation that I gave nothing back to the family. At the time, it had stung because it seemed so unfair. Now, a year later, I could see that her inability to recognize non-monetary contributions said more about her worldview than it did about my value as a family member. People see value through different lenses, I said finally. Margaret valued financial contributions and practical help. Those are important things, but they're not the only important things. No, they're not. And I'm sorry it took me so long to stand up for what really matters. That conversation marked another shift in our relationship. Thomas began including me more actively in decisions about the children's activities and future plans. When Olivia needed help with college applications, he asked if I'd assist with the financial aid forms, knowing my accounting background would be helpful. When Benjamin wanted to enter his pumpkins in the county fair, Thomas asked if I'd be his coach. These weren't token gestures or attempts to assuage guilt. They were genuine recognitions of my role as grandfather and my contributions to the family. The difference in how it felt to be wanted rather than merely tolerated was profound. As Christmas approached, both children decided they didn't want to visit Margaret in California. Thomas handled the phone call, and while I wasn't privy to the conversation, I gathered from his expression afterward that it hadn't gone well. She thinks we're turning the kids against her, he reported. Are you? No. I've been careful not to criticize her in front of them, but I'm not going to force them to maintain a relationship they don't want either. It was a delicate balance, and I respected Thomas for trying to navigate it fairly. Children shouldn't be forced to choose sides in adult conflicts, but they also shouldn't be forced to maintain relationships that make them uncomfortable. Christmas morning at my house was magical in a way that the old family gatherings had never been. Benjamin proudly presented me with a photo album he'd created, documenting his garden's progress throughout the year. Olivia gave me a set of watercolor paints and brushes, having noticed my interest in art. Their gifts were thoughtful, personal, and chosen with genuine care. More importantly, their excitement about giving them was real. There was no obligation, no performance, no undercurrent of resentment. I'd prepared gifts for them as well, a professional gardening kit for Benjamin, complete with soil testing equipment and specialized tools, and a laptop for Olivia to use for her college applications and coursework. But the real gift was the scholarship announcement I shared over Christmas. Dinner, the Eleanor Whitman Memorial Scholarship Fund had grown beyond my initial expectations, thanks to some successful investments and additional donations from friends who'd learned about the program. We would be able to offer 5 full scholarships the following year instead of 3. Grandpa, that's amazing, Olivia said. Grandma would be so proud. She would, I agreed. She always believed education was the best investment you could make in someone's future. Benjamin, ever practical, asked, how do kids find out about the scholarships? Well, the university handles most of the publicity, but I was thinking about visiting some high schools to talk about financial planning and college preparation. That way students learn about both the scholarships and how to manage money in general. Could I come with you sometimes? Benjamin asked. I could talk about the gardening program and how it taught me about planning and responsibility. The idea of Benjamin as my co-presenter was delightful. I think that's a wonderful idea. You could be my youth ambassador, Olivia laughed. Benjamin's going to be famous, the 12-year-old gardening guru. 13 next month, Benjamin corrected with dignity. And I'll have been gardening for a whole year by then. Their easy banter and genuine enthusiasm reminded me why I'd been willing to endure those uncomfortable Sunday dinners for so many years. These children were worth the effort. They always had been. The difference now was that I could enjoy their company without the stress of managing someone else's disapproval. As winter turned to spring, our routines became more established. Benjamin's weekend gardening sessions expanded to include planning and research during the week. He'd call me with questions about companion planting or organic pest control, and I'd help him research solutions online. Olivia started visiting during the week as well, often coming by after school to work on homework in the quiet of my house. She said it was easier to concentrate there than at home, where the divorce proceedings and household adjustments were still creating chaos. Is it weird that your house feels more peaceful than ours? She asked one afternoon as she worked on calculus problems at my kitchen table. Not weird at all, I replied. Sometimes we need quiet spaces to think clearly. You're welcome here anytime. Dad's doing better, but there's still a lot of stress about the divorce stuff. Lawyers and paperwork and dividing up everything. It's exhausting. I poured her a glass of lemonade and sat down across from her. Divorce is one of life's major stresses, even when it's the right decision. It's normal for it to affect the whole family. Do you think Dad's happier without Mom? It was a complicated question, and I wanted to answer it honestly without being disloyal to either parent. I think your father is more relaxed now, I said carefully. Sometimes people bring out different sides of each other, and not all combinations work well long-term. She nodded thoughtfully. I can see that. Dad laughs more now, and he doesn't get that tight look around his eyes like he used to. Her observation was astute. Thomas did seem lighter, less burdened by constant conflict and criticism. The end of his marriage had been painful, but it had also freed him from a relationship that had become more destructive than supportive. "What about you?" I asked. "How are you handling all the changes?" Olivia was quiet for a moment, working through a particularly complex equation. Finally, she looked up. "I feel bad saying this, but I think I'm happier too. I love Mom, but living with her was like walking on eggshells all the time. Everything had to be perfect, and if it wasn't, someone was going to get blamed." I remembered that feeling well. You don't have to feel guilty for being relieved when a stressful situation ends, really. Because sometimes I worry that I'm a terrible daughter for not missing her more. You're not terrible at all. You're human. It's possible to love someone and still recognize that they're difficult to live with. This conversation helped me understand something important about the family dynamics I'd been navigating for years. Margaret's need for control and perfection hadn't just affected her relationship with me, it had created an atmosphere of tension that impacted everyone in the household. By removing myself from that environment, I hadn't just improved my own well-being. I'd inadvertently helped create space for the family to function more naturally. Without an external target for Margaret's criticism, the underlying issues in the marriage had become more apparent, ultimately leading to Thomas's decision to end the relationship. I didn't take credit for their divorce. That was the result of problems that existed long before that Sunday dinner. But I did recognize that my withdrawal had removed one source of conflict and allowed everyone to see the situation more clearly. Spring brought exciting developments in Benjamin's gardening projects. His plot had expanded to include a small greenhouse Thomas had helped him build, and he was experimenting with starting seedlings from heirloom varieties. His scientific approach to gardening impressed me. He kept detailed records of planting dates, weather conditions, and harvest yields. "I want to compare different growing methods," he explained as he showed me his meticulous charts. Like, do plants grown from seeds do better than transplants? Does organic fertilizer really work better than chemical fertilizer? How much difference does crop rotation make? "Those are excellent research questions," I said, reviewing his data. "Have you thought about entering your results in the school science fair?" His eyes lit up. Would gardening count as science?" Gardening is applied biology, chemistry, and environmental science all rolled into one. It's definitely science. We spent the next several weeks preparing his presentation for the regional science fair. Benjamin's project, Sustainable Growing Methods, a comparative analysis, was thorough, well-documented, and impressive for a 13-year-old's work. The night before the competition, Thomas came by to help us make final preparations. As we worked on Benjamin's poster board, he pulled me aside. "Dad, I need to tell you how grateful I am for everything you've done with Benjamin this year. His confidence has grown so much, and his genuine interest in science and learning. I know that comes from working with you." "Benjamin did all the hard work," I replied. "I just provided guidance and encouragement." That's exactly what he needed, what both kids needed, actually. A steady, supportive presence who believes in their potential. The next day, Benjamin won second place in the middle school environmental science category. His project was displayed alongside work from students much older than him, and he fielded questions from judges and visitors with the confidence of someone who truly understood his subject matter. Watching him explain his methodology and results to interested observers, I felt a pride that had nothing to do with personal achievement and everything to do with witnessing a young person discover his own capabilities. "Grandpa, did you see? I got second place." Benjamin ran up to me after the awards ceremony, his ribbon clutched in his hand and his face glowing with excitement. "I saw, and I'm incredibly proud of you. You did outstanding work. I couldn't have done it without your help. Thank you for teaching me everything about gardening and helping me with the science part." "You're very welcome, but remember, this success belongs to you. You did the research, kept the records, and conducted the experiments. I just helped you organize your thoughts." That evening, we celebrated at Benjamin's favorite restaurant. We waited for our food. Olivia raised her water glass in a mock toast. To Benjamin, the scientist gardener, and to Grandpa Harold, the best teacher ever. "And to family," Thomas added, "the kind that supports each other's dreams." As we clinked glasses, I reflected on how different this celebration felt from those old Sunday dinners. There was no undercurrent of tension, no need to moderate our enthusiasm to avoid offending anyone. We could simply enjoy each other's success and company. Later that spring, I received unexpected news that would test the stability of our rebuilt family relationships. During a routine checkup, my doctor discovered some irregularities that required further testing. After a series of appointments and procedures, I was diagnosed with early-stage prostate cancer. The prognosis was good, caught early, highly treatable, excellent survival rates. But the diagnosis was still sobering, a reminder that at 73 I wasn't guaranteed endless years ahead. I debated how and when to tell the family. I didn't want to alarm anyone unnecessarily, but I also didn't want to hide something important. Finally, I decided to tell Thomas first and let him help me figure out how to discuss it with the children. Dad, are you sure about the prognosis? Thomas asked after I'd explained the situation. Do you want a second opinion? We could go to the university hospital or find a specialist in the city. His immediate concern and willingness to help touched me deeply. The oncologist is confident about the treatment plan and I trust his expertise, but I appreciate your support, of course. Whatever you need, transportation to appointments, help around the house, anything. We talked about treatment options and timing. I would need surgery followed by a course of radiation therapy. The recovery would take several months, during which I'd need to limit my physical activities. What about the garden? Thomas asked, and your volunteer work? I'll have to scale back for a while. That's one of the hardest parts of this diagnosis, accepting that I'll need help with things I've always done independently. Dad, you've been helping everyone else for decades. It's time to let people help you. When we told Olivia and Benjamin about the diagnosis, their reactions were exactly what I should have expected. Olivia, now a senior in high school and thinking more like an adult, asked practical questions about treatment and recovery. Benjamin, still 13 and more focused on immediate concerns, wanted to know who would help him with his garden projects. We'll figure it out, I assured him. Maybe this is a good opportunity for you to become more independent with your research and planning, but I like working with you. It's not the same doing it alone. His honest response reminded me that our gardening sessions had become as important to him as they were to me. We'll still work together, Benjamin. I might just need to supervise more and dig less for a while. The surgery was scheduled for early June, after Benjamin's school year ended but before Olivia left for a summer pre-college program. Thomas took time off work to drive me to appointments and stay with me during the procedure. The morning of surgery, as we sat in the pre-op waiting area, Thomas was more nervous than I was. I keep thinking about last year, about how close we came to losing our relationship over Margaret's nonsense. If something happened to you now and we hadn't worked things out, but we did work things out, I said gently. And nothing's going to happen to me. This is a very routine procedure. I know, it's just, I don't want to waste any more time on things that don't matter. Neither do I. That's one of the gifts of getting older. You get better at identifying what's truly important. The surgery went smoothly and recovery progressed as expected. Thomas insisted on staying with me for the first week, sleeping in the guest room and helping with meals and basic household tasks. Olivia visited every day, often bringing homework to work on while keeping me company. Benjamin came by each afternoon to check on both me and his garden, providing detailed reports on plant growth and any problems that had developed. Their care and attention were touching, but what impressed me most was how naturally they stepped into supportive roles. Without being asked, Olivia took over grocery shopping and meal planning. Benjamin researched which garden tasks were most critical during my recovery period and prioritized accordingly. Thomas coordinated with my doctors and managed the logistics of ongoing treatment. This was the family support I'd always hoped for but had never felt confident I could count on. The difference was that now it emerged organically from genuine affection and concern, not from obligation or guilt. During the long, quiet days of early recovery, I had plenty of time to think about the events of the past 2 years. Margaret's accusation that I was a freeloader had initially hurt because it challenged my sense of contributing meaningfully to the family. Now, watching my son and grandchildren rally around me during a health crisis, I could see how wrong she'd been. My contributions to this family weren't measured in dollars or practical services. They were measured in relationships built over time, in wisdom shared across generations, in love given freely without expectation of return. Margaret had been keeping the wrong kind of accounting. By the time I started radiation treatments in July, I was feeling stronger and more optimistic about the future. The treatments themselves were manageable, brief daily sessions that left me tired but not incapacitated. Olivia had postponed her summer program to help with my care, a decision that initially worried me. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't put your life on hold because of my health issues," I told her. "I'm not putting my life on hold. I'm choosing to spend time with someone I love when he needs support. That's not sacrifice, that's family." Her matter-of-fact response reminded me of Alina, who had always approached family loyalty as a natural expression of love rather than a burden to be borne. Benjamin, meanwhile, had thrown himself into garden management with impressive dedication. He'd recruited 2 friends to help with the physical labor I couldn't manage, turning my recovery into a community project. The 3 boys spent their summer mornings weeding, watering, and harvesting, then afternoon researching plant diseases or planning next year's layout. "Grandpa, we're thinking about adding a composting demonstration area," Benjamin announced one afternoon. "You know, to show people how to turn kitchen scraps into soil nutrients. That's a wonderful idea." "Who would you be demonstrating for?" "Well, Dad said maybe we could have school groups visit during the growing season, like field trips to learn about sustainable agriculture." The idea of turning my modest backyard garden into an educational resource was ambitious and exciting. "That would require some planning and preparation. Are you sure you want to take on that much responsibility?" "I want to try." and I figure you'll be feeling better by next spring so you could help with the teaching part." His confidence in my recovery and his willingness to expand our shared project into something that could benefit other children showed a maturity that impressed me. At 13, Benjamin was already thinking about giving back to his community. As summer progressed and my treatments neared completion, our routines adapted to include my medical schedule while maintaining the family connections we'd all come to value. Thomas continued his regular visits, often bringing dinner from restaurants I enjoyed but couldn't prepare myself. Olivia maintained her afternoon homework sessions at my kitchen table, claiming, "My house was still the best place to concentrate." Benjamin's daily garden reports became the highlight of my day, detailed accounts of plant progress, weather observations, and plans for future improvements. In August, I received another unexpected phone call from Margaret. She'd heard about my cancer diagnosis through mutual friends and wanted to express her concern. "Harold, I know things ended badly between us, but I want you to know I'm thinking of you during this difficult time," she said, her voice carefully modulated to sound appropriately sympathetic. "Thank you, Margaret. I appreciate that. How are you managing? Are the children helping out? I worry that this might be too much responsibility for them." I almost smiled at the familiar undercurrent in her voice, the suggestion that somehow my illness was imposing unfairly on others. "They're doing wonderfully." Thomas has been incredibly supportive, and both Olivia and Benjamin have stepped up in ways that make me very proud. "Well, that's good. I just wanted you to know that if you need anything or if the family needs support, I'm willing to help." The offer was probably genuine, but it also carried the subtle implication that my care was a burden that might overwhelm Thomas and the children. It was vintage Margaret, helpful on the surface, undermining beneath. "That's kind of you, but we're managing very well." I've been impressed by how naturally everyone has taken on supporting roles. After we hung up, I reflected on how different that conversation felt from our interactions 2 years earlier. Margaret's words still carried barbs, but they no longer had the power to hurt me. I understood now that her need to diminish others said more about her insecurities than about the reality of any situation. My final radiation treatment was scheduled for early September, just as Benjamin started 8th grade and Olivia began her senior year of high school. By then, I was feeling significantly better and looking forward to gradually resuming normal activities. The night before my last treatment, we held what Thomas jokingly called a pre-victory celebration dinner at my house. Olivia made Aliner's famous lasagna recipe, which she'd mastered during my recovery. Benjamin prepared a salad with vegetables from his garden, and Thomas brought wine for the adults and sparkling cider for Benjamin. "To Grandpa's recovery," Olivia said, raising her glass, "and to getting through this scary time together." "To family," Thomas added, "and to appreciating what we have while we have it." "To the best gardening teacher ever," Benjamin contributed, "and to getting back to work on our educational garden project." As we clinked glasses, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought us to this moment. 2 years earlier, I'd sat at a different dinner table feeling unwelcome and misunderstood. Now I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my well-being and wanted me in their lives. The cancer diagnosis had been frightening, but it had also clarified something important about the family relationships we'd rebuilt. When faced with the possibility of losing me, everyone had responded with love and support that felt completely natural and unforced. We had become the kind of family I'd always hoped we could be. The final radiation treatment was anticlimactic, a brief procedure followed by congratulations from the medical team and instructions for follow-up care. The real celebration came that evening when Benjamin presented me with a portfolio he'd been working on throughout my treatment. "It's a complete record of this year's garden," he explained as I turned through pages of photographs, charts, and detailed observations. "I wanted to make sure we didn't lose any of the information while you were sick." The portfolio was comprehensive and impressive. Benjamin had documented every aspect of our gardening projects, from soil preparation through harvest, including notes about what worked well and what could be improved. But more than that, he'd captured the joy and satisfaction we'd both found in working with plants and soil. "Benjamin, this is incredible. You've created a real scientific record of our work. I was thinking we could use it to plan next year's educational programs. Show people what's possible when you approach gardening systematically." The idea that our small garden could serve as an educational resource for other families was ambitious but achievable. With proper planning and community support, we could create programs for children and adults interested in learning sustainable growing methods. "I think that's a wonderful goal," I told him. "We'll have all winter to develop curriculum and prepare demonstration areas." As autumn arrived and I received my first clear health report since the diagnosis, I began thinking seriously about Benjamin's educational garden concept. The Aliner Whitman Memorial Scholarship Fund was well established and running smoothly. My volunteer work at the Literacy Center was rewarding but didn't require full-time commitment. I had the time and energy to take on a new project, especially one that could benefit local families. The first step was research. Olivia, who was taking an environmental science course as part of her senior year curriculum, offered to help investigate similar programs in other communities. What we found was encouraging community gardens with educational components were becoming increasingly popular, and there were established models we could adapt for our situation. By November, we had drafted a preliminary proposal for the Eleanor Whitman Community Learning Garden. The program would offer workshops on sustainable gardening methods, school field trips focused on plant biology and environmental science, and mentorship opportunities pairing experienced gardeners with beginners. The proposal caught the attention of the local extension office, who offered to provide technical support and help us apply for grant funding. The community college expressed interest in incorporating our program into their continuing education offerings. Even the elementary school district showed enthusiasm for field trip opportunities. "Grandpa, this is getting really big," Benjamin observed as we reviewed the latest correspondence from potential partners. "Are you having second thoughts about the scope of what we're proposing?" "No, I'm excited. It started as us working in your backyard, and now we're talking about serving hundreds of families." I understood his amazement. What had begun as a grandfather teaching his grandson to grow tomatoes had evolved into something with real potential to impact our broader community. "That's often how the best projects develop," I told him. "They start with personal passion and grow into public service." That winter, as we refined our plans and submitted grant applications, I reflected on the unexpected trajectory my life had taken since that devastating Sunday dinner 2 years earlier. Margaret's cruel assessment of my worth to the family had sparked a period of withdrawal and self-examination that ultimately led to greater happiness and purpose than I'd experienced in years. The scholarship fund was providing educational opportunities for deserving students. My relationships with Thomas, Olivia, and Benjamin were deeper and more genuine than they'd ever been. My health scare had been successfully treated and had brought our family closer together, and now I was embarking on a new venture that could benefit countless families in our community. None of this would have happened if I'd continued to endure those uncomfortable Sunday dinners, trying to maintain relationships that weren't truly wanted. By accepting Margaret's verdict and stepping away, I'd created space for better things to enter my life. Christmas of that second year was even more joyful than the previous one. It established new traditions that felt authentic to our family. Benjamin's garden-themed gifts. He made beautiful photo calendars featuring plants from each month of the growing season. Olivia's thoughtful selections that showed her growing maturity. She'd chosen books on sustainable agriculture for me and advanced gardening tools for Benjamin. And Thomas's generous support of our educational garden project. He'd surprised us with a donation to purchase greenhouse equipment and raised bed materials. But the most meaningful gift that Christmas was intangible, the knowledge that we'd built something lasting and real together. Our family relationships were no longer based on obligation or guilt, but on genuine affection and mutual respect. On New Year's Eve, as I sat in Eleanor's favorite chair looking out at the winter garden, I thought about the year ahead. The educational garden project would launch in the spring. Olivia would graduate and head off to college. She'd been accepted to several excellent environmental science programs. Benjamin would continue developing his expertise and taking on more responsibility for community education efforts. Most importantly, I would continue to be valued and appreciated by the people who mattered most to me. The freeloader that Margaret had dismissed so cruelly had become a beloved grandfather, trusted mentor, and valued community member. Sometimes the most devastating words turn out to be the most liberating. Margaret's judgment had freed me from trying to earn acceptance from someone who was incapable of giving it. In doing so, it had opened doors to relationships and experiences that brought genuine fulfillment. As the clock struck midnight and I raised my glass of grape juice and a solitary toast, I whispered a thank you to the universe for the unexpected gifts that had emerged from that painful evening 2 years earlier. "To new beginnings," I said to the sleeping garden outside my window, and to the wisdom that sometimes comes disguised as cruelty. The garden, dormant under its blanket of snow, held the promise of another growing season ahead. Like the relationships I'd cultivated with my family, it would bloom again when conditions were right. And this time I knew without doubt that I would be there to tend it, valued and welcome, surrounded by people who understood that love isn't a transaction to be balanced, but a gift to be freely given and gratefully received. An empty chair that had once symbolized my exclusion from family dinners now represented something entirely different, the space I'd created by choosing dignity over desperation, self-respect over acceptance at any cost. It was the best decision I'd ever made.